north of the Salt River, having been organized March 15th, 1823. Concerning Jeremiah Taylor was one of the pioneer preachers of Marion County, having come to Missouri in 1822, so about just a year before that. He was one of the most useful preachers of his day. Not an educated man, but his life was a living epistle, known and read of all men who knew him. His doctrinal views, some of you will appreciate that, were those held by the great Andrew Fuller. Okay, so he was one that was an evangelist, okay? He propagating the gospel. Was the great Andrew Fuller of England. These he would press with great earnestness and zeal. He was born in Buncombe County, North Carolina, in February 27, 1774, and as for a useful life of half a century as a Baptist minister, he died May the 21st, 1848. He was present and preached at the introductory sermon at the organization of the Salt River Association in 1828. He also aided in the formation and became a constituent member of the Bethel Association in 1834. The strong Baptist influence in and around Palmyra. So this church is just north of Palmyra a little bit, but notice the historian says here the strong Baptist influence in and around Palmyra is due in no small degree to the foundation laid by this good man. He was also a pleasant speaker, or he was not a pleasant speaker, nor was his success due to his pulpit labor, but, now get this, and this is kind of what I want to emphasize, but to his pastoral work. You know, I often think about what Paul said, that what God uses is the foolishness of preaching. And, you know, sometimes we stand at a grave and we can be here and we're like, oh, this guy, he must have been a great preacher. Man, he must have just been a great orator. And I mean, we just came from Jeremiah Taylor, who had that testimony. But here we're standing at a grave and people's like, well, he's not much of a preacher. Are you hearing me? But God uses all kinds.
That's right.
God uses all kinds. And don't even be an encouragement to some of these young preachers.
Amen.
I mean, here's a guy that spent 40 plus years of his life preaching, and at the end of his life, it was said of him, well, he wasn't much of a preacher. But you know what? He was faithful, and he served, and he planted churches. Amen? And I want to say this, especially with these young men standing here. Young men, I want to say something. Don't not enter the ministry because you think about who you are and you think, well, I'd never make much of a preacher. Let me tell you something. There's been men who preached for 40 years, and Jeremiah Taylor was one of them, who at the end of his life wasn't much of a preacher. That's what the historian said. But listen, if you got a call of God on your life,
Amen.
And I'll just say this, there is a need in our generation.
Right.
Brother Smith stands here, who's pastored for 38 years, and I guarantee you, as he gets older, he probably begins to think, well, who's going to take my place? Are you hearing me? And us older, as us men get older, we think about who's going to take our place, who's going to stand, who's going to hold the sword. And don't think yourself not useful. Hey, God uses a lot of people, and I believe, once again, we read about James Smith.